Some invitations are not sent to be accepted. They are sent to see whether you still belong to the part of yourself that answers. Welcome back to Tongue of the Serpent. Last time, we opened the door to Crew of the Morning Star and saw what kind of place it is. A shop in the French Quarter where longing can be given shape, where the dead are not always as distant as they should be, and where every request leaves something behind. Tonight, we step further in, because the city, like New Orleans, does not reveal its teeth all at once. It smiles first, it pours a drink, it lights the candles, it invites you somewhere beautiful and private and old enough to know exactly what you cannot resist. There is a masquerade hidden in the folds of this city, a gathering of masks, music, appetite, and debt. A place where every gesture costs something, where every courtesy has fine print, and where Lucien Devereux is about to be reminded that some doors do not stay in the past simply because you stopped knocking on them. If Crew of the Morning Star is one kind of threshold, this is another. Not a shop this time, but a ballroom. Not a request, but an invitation. Tonight's episode is The Devil's Masquerade. Come in carefully. Not everything wearing charm is harmless. There is a ball every year, hidden in the folds of New Orleans' long, tattered coat of secrets. There are no flyers, no whispered passwords passed between the right chandelier. It does not post on social media, begging for attention from the internet, which is how you can tell it's old money. Still, it fills. That is the unnerving part, not the masks or the music or the champagne that tastes faintly of regret. It fills because the city itself has a fondness for choosing its guests. New Orleans will let you wander for years without consequence, and then on a Tuesday slip destiny into your pocket while you're busy buying bread. Lucien Devereux received his invitation the way most meaningful things arrive, quietly and without permission. He was closing the Crew of the Morning Star, resetting the shop the way a careful man resets a snare, straightening objects that preferred to sit crooked, locking drawers that enjoyed being open, counting the day's small tragedies and pocketing the ones that could be used again. Lucien looked as he always did, like time had tried to wear him down and failed. Ginger beard trimmed to impeccable lines, hair neatly kept, shirt cuffs unwrinkled, flawless and precise. He dressed like a Victorian gentleman, because some habits become religion when you've had long enough to practice them. He reached for a book he had not opened in months. The book opened itself, of course. They nearly always did in that shop. Tucked between pages that smelled of wax and old river water was a card the color of bruised parchment, elegant script curled across it like smoke, learning to write. Formal attire required. No iron, no garlic, no prayers on the premises. Arrive on time. There was no address, no signature, only a faint scorch mark in one corner, shaped like something ornamental and dangerous. Lucien read the list twice. People who deal in bargains develop the same habits as people who deal in crocodiles. You do not assume you've seen all the teeth on the first pass. He held the invitation between two fingers with the wary affection one reserves for a snake one used to love before learning it could unhinge its jaw. Royal Street at night has a habit of looking innocent. It polishes itself, it poses. The lamps make everything feel like a story someone is telling you with a straight face. And if you lived here long enough, you learn that straight faces are not evidence of honesty. The house was waiting where it always waited, tucked between respectable facades like a bad idea between good intentions. Balconies watched the street with tired patience, ironwork curled in black ribs and vines, protective and hungry in equal measure. Lucien paused at the gate, because even immortality does not cure the body's fondness for pretending it has options. He adjusted his gloves, smoothed a cuff that did not need smoothing. Little rituals like that are fences you build around yourself when you spend your life walking through places that do not respect borders. The doorknob was warm when he touched it. Inside, the air changed. It thickened with candle smoke and perfume, and the faint copper tang of something that had once been blood and had never quite forgiven the world for moving on. Music drifted from somewhere unseen, a stringed melody that refused to resolve, circling and circling, as though the final note were a promise no one could afford. The guests moved the way wax figures move when the room is too hot and the shadows have started taking liberties. Masks glittered, feathers nodded, jewels caught the light and seemed to swallow it back down. People laughed, danced, drank, and tried very hard not to look like they were calculating their exits. A man in a plague doctor's mask stood before a mirror and whispered to his reflection. The reflection listened with admirable patience and then replied, though the man's beak mouth never moved. A woman spun past in a veil that dragged night after it. Nearby, a guest in a gilded half-mask laughed, but the sound arrived a heartbeat late, as if someone backstage had missed their cue and scrambled to catch up. Parties like this are for people who cannot say no to curiosity, and for creatures who have learned that yes is a door with a very convenient handle. Most of the attendees were one or the other. Some were both, which was where the trouble started. Lucien stepped forward, posture composed, coat brushed, and the room made space for him the way a courtroom makes space for a man everyone recognizes. He felt eyes on him behind velvet and glass and bone. He felt the house listening. Then the host appeared, as if he had been standing there the whole time and had only just decided to be seen. Monsieur Dubois was blonde, luminous, and dressed with the kind of flawless extravagance that suggested either impeccable taste or an active disdain for restraint. His suit was cut like a love letter and worn like a threat. Jewels winked at the candlelight. His hair had the sort of effortless perfection that takes entirely too much effort. If there were horns, they were either real or very, very expensive, and in this room that distinction was mostly a matter of manners. He smiled like a darling. He smiled like a disaster. "Ah," said Monsieur Dubois, softly amused. "Right on time," Lucien replied. "You haven't changed a bit, old friend." Dubois' eyes brightened with genuine delight, which was almost the most alarming thing about him. "Oh, I've changed," he said. "I simply keep the improvements private." Then, with the careless intimacy of someone who believed rules were only suggestions for other people, he reached out and adjusted the fall of Lucien's collar. It was almost affectionate. It was also a reminder. "That's better," Dubois murmured, as if Lucien were a beloved doll he insisted on keeping in perfect condition. He gestured, and a glass appeared as if it had been waiting just out of sight, eager for the moment. The liquid inside was a dark ruby black that caught candlelight and held it. "Drink?" Dubois offered. Lucien accepted the glass with a closed smile. He turned it slightly, watching the way the surface clung to the crystal, breathed in once, careful, and did not drink. "That depends," Lucien said. "Is it wine or a debt waiting to be collected?" Dubois laughed. "Always reading the fine print." "One survives," Lucien said mildly, "by noticing what's written in the margins." Dubois leaned closer. "At my parties," he murmured, "there is no margin. Only the part you notice and the part you don't. The Devil's Masquerade is not a place where gifts exist. There are gestures. There are favors. There are offerings wrapped in silk and carried on silver trays by beautiful people who look as though they have never known boredom or sunlight. But nothing is given freely. Nothing is free in New Orleans at the best of times. And this was not the best of times. Everything was a transaction, even compliments. Especially compliments. Lucien had learned that long ago. He had watched men drink from goblets that gleamed like sunlight and wake up decades later with the bewildered expression of someone who had misplaced his entire life. He had watched women twirl in lace and feathers and vanish before the final dance, leaving their masks behind like shed skin. "Still cautious," Dubois said, watching Lucien watch the glass. "How predictable. I almost missed the version of you that thought consequences were for other people." "That version died," Lucien said pleasantly. Dubois smiled wider. "Did he? Or did he simply change costumes?" Then, as if asking after an old acquaintance, Dubois said, "Do you remember the gentleman from last year? Tall, nervous, chose gold over wisdom." He tilted his head toward the dance floor. Among the candlelit bodies moved a man in a mask shaped like a sunburst. He danced beautifully, flawlessly. His feet never faltered. His hands never trembled. His smile never changed. He danced like someone who no longer needed to breathe. "Still dancing," Dubois murmured. "Isn't devotion charming?" And that was when Lucien understood the shape of the night. This was more than a party. It was an appointment. The music swelled, slightly louder, slightly closer, as if it had stepped into the room and taken a seat beside the ear. Dubois lifted his glass in a gesture that managed to be both celebratory and judicial. Around the room, masked faces turned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice sliding easily into every alcove and shadow, "friends, enemies, unfinished stories, welcome." A few guests applauded. One clapped a beat late. No one seemed surprised. "You know why you're here," Dubois continued. "Some of you came for pleasure. Some came for answers. Some came here because you were foolish enough to think you could leave without paying." His gaze found Lucien. "It is time," he said, for the accounting." At that word, the room went attentive. Candlelight trembled against the walls and then steadied. The whole house seemed to gather itself around the silence. The accounting was what polite people called it when they wanted to pretend it was not a game. Others called it the Devil's Dance, the final set, the last hand. Different names, same rule. When the music changed, the night stopped pretending. The wagers began quietly. A woman in a pearl mask leaned to a man with antlers stitched into his hood and whispered, "A year," like she was offering dessert. He nodded, and in exchange she slid him a folded scrap of paper. He read it, and his face went pale beneath the mask. At the edge of the room, a young man offered a secret into the ear of a dancer whose gown shimmered like swamp water under moonlight. The dancer smiled, and the young man exhaled as though a weight had lifted. He looked 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older. A man sipped from a golden goblet and stared into nothing with the expression of someone who had forgotten why he'd come, why he'd wanted anything at all, why he'd ever believed his life belonged to him. A woman kept adjusting her mask. Each time she lifted it a fraction, the skin beneath seemed slightly different, as if her face were trying on options. Near the bar, someone had pinned a small sign to the wall in tidy black letters. "No refunds, no resurrections. Ask about our group rates." People laughed when they read it, which is how you can tell they were frightened. Dubois drifted back toward Lucien with the smooth inevitability of a tide. "Come now," he said, voice dipped in honey and threat. "Play with me, Lucien. Just one hand, just one dance, just one tiny signature." "I didn't come to play," Lucien said. "My dear Lucien," Dubois murmured, velvet wrapped neatly around a blade. "No one comes here to play." He leaned in, voice almost tender. "They come here to be chosen." Lucien felt it then, unmistakably, the subtle tightening in the air around his name, that familiar sense of invisible ink drying on a contract he had not agreed to sign. He had told himself he was here to observe, to keep certain debts unsettled, but the night was not interested in his intentions. He was here to be collected. Then, the doors at the far end of the hall opened without anyone touching them. The music did not stop, but it faltered just briefly, as though it had lost its place in the measure and was embarrassed to admit it. She walked in, wearing deep green, the kind of green that belongs to old velvet and dark water and forgotten empires. Her honey blonde hair was pinned high and neat, coiled like secrets whispered under a full moon. She moved with the casual, regal elegance of someone who has never once needed permission to enter a room. She did not wear a mask, and at the Devil's Masquerade, that is either a declaration or a threat, sometimes both. Tonight it landed as something rarer, a correction. A hush moved through the crowd. Candle flames flickered, straightened, and held very still. Guests edged out of her way with the uncertain urgency people reserve for royalty and plague. Lucien's posture remained composed, but his shoulders lowered by the tiniest fraction. He had been wondering when she would arrive. "Lucien Devereux," she said when she reached him, as though greeting him in a market line. "Evelyn," Lucien said, "I was beginning to think you'd let me suffer alone." I considered it, Evelyn said, briefly. Dubois grinned like a man who had just been handed a sharper knife and told he could play with it indoors. Oh, he breathed, now this is generous. Evelyn looked at Lucien first. There was pity in her gaze, but it had been sounded down into something usable. You know how this ends, she said quietly. The table always wins eventually. Lucien lifted his untouched glass slightly. You say that as if I'm surprised by mathematics. Mathematics is honest, Evelyn said, glancing at the drink. This is accounting with a personality problem. Dubois chuckled. My dear, I've never been accused of lacking personality. Evelyn turned to him at last, unimpressed in a way that would have been almost comical if the room were less dangerous. Your parties are always loud, she said. It's how you keep people from hearing the locks click. Resistance delighted him. It lit something bright and childish and bottomless inside him. Since you're here, he said, perhaps we raise the stakes. He clapped his hands once. The room responded. The candles leaned inward. The mirrors along the walls deepened, becoming less reflective and more attentive. The music tightened, turning from background charm into something closer to enforcement. Rule 1, Dubois said, voice carrying with practiced ease. Once you take the first step, you may not leave. An unsurprised murmur moved through the guests. Rule 2, the music chooses what it wants. On cue, the strings shifted into a pattern too deliberate to be random, too hungry to be human. And Rule 3, Dubois said, smiling, the price is collected at midnight's edge. There it was, the axe waiting to land. He turned to Lucien with all his charm and teeth. You have a choice. Pay what you owe tonight in full, or gamble for better terms. Better terms implied you've offered fair ones before, Lucien said. Fair? Dubois pressed a hand to his chest, mock-wounded. My dear Lucien, I am always generous. The word hung in the air like a dare. Lucien's eyes flicked to the sunburst masked man, still dancing, still smiling, still unblinking. Dubois followed the glance and beamed. Ah, yes, he's devout in his performance. You call it that. I call it honoring the agreement. Lucien drew breath, ready to do what he always did when threatened. Talk, negotiate, turn danger into grammar. Define old, he said. Define debt. Define cleanly. Dubois smiled. The sacred right of a man trying to negotiate with a trap. Then, very softly, almost fondly, he added, Come on, my little antique. Lucien's expression barely changed, but the air around him tightened. Before he could answer, Evelyn said, calm as a judge, clearing her throat, I have one question. Dubois turned toward her with delighted courtesy. Who holds the promissory note? Evelyn asked. The room went still in a different way now, the way a room stills when someone has said the correct legal phrase in front of people, hoping no one would. Dubois' eyes glittered. I do. No, Evelyn said gently. You present it. That's not the same thing. Lucien's gaze shifted to her at once. Dubois' smile changed. For one heartbeat, something older looked out through the darling, something infernal and bottomless, wearing beauty like a joke it never tired of telling. Then it was gone again. How delightful, he murmured. You've been paying attention. I always pay attention, Evelyn replied. It's how I avoid surprises. The rules stand, Dubois said. The rules stand, Evelyn agreed, but the terms can change. He laughed warmly. I do adore you. Then he extended his hand toward Lucien, palm up, like a dance invitation. First step, he said. Lucien looked at the offered hand the way he had looked at the invitation, with wary affection and a reasonable suspicion that it wanted something from him. He could refuse. He could attempt to leave. He could pretend choice still meant what it meant elsewhere. But the air around him had already changed. The candles leaned closer. The mirrors watched. His own name seemed to hover at the edge of his hearing, tugged like thread in someone else's fingers. Lucien sat beside his glass. He took Dubois' hand. The room inhaled. The floor shifted in that particular way reality shifts when it decides a contract has been accepted. The music snapped into a rhythm that fit Lucien's heartbeat a little too well. Dubois guided him onto the dance floor with the ease of a man leading someone toward a cliff while complimenting the view. Lucien danced because the music demanded it. He moved well. He always had. Grace was a kind of camouflage. But the steps tightened, and the melody twisted into something older. He felt it, the tug at his name, at the word that meant him, pulled gently but insistently, as if someone were testing the knot. He tried to speak. The music swallowed the first syllable. Dubois leaned closer. There you are, he murmured. I wondered when you'd stop pretending you were only here to observe. Evelyn stepped forward, stopping the dance. She laid her fingers lightly against Lucien's wrist, where his pulse beat fast and stubborn and alive. She inserted herself into the steps, creating a dance made for three. Midnight is approaching, she said. I know, Monsieur Dubois replied. Then let's be clear, Evelyn said. What exactly are you collecting? Somewhere deep in the house, a clock that had not been visible all night began to make itself known, not with a chime. Chimes are for churches and weddings and people who still believe time is polite. This was a single, low, inevitable note, like a throat clearing in a quiet courtroom. Dubois' fingers tightened around Lucien's hand. The dance narrowed. The steps became mechanism more than movement, a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a long time to remember it was hungry. Choose, Evelyn said quietly to Lucien, or he will choose for you. Lucien forced the words past the music. You said better terms. Dubois smiled. Of course. I'm not unreasonable. I want to pay something now, Lucien said, in exchange for leaving with the rest of me. Dubois laughed softly. How wonderfully human of you. Lucien glanced at Evelyn. Then he made his choice. I will give you a year. The room sharpened. Even the candles seemed to pause, listening for the fine print. A whole year, Dubois said, almost tender. How gracious. A year, Lucien repeated. No interest, no additional fees, no substitutions. Evelyn's fingers pressed once against his pulse. Dubois released Lucien's hand with a theatrical flourish and reached toward the space beside him as though plucking a thread from a sleeve. Lucien felt it happen as subtraction, a brief line of cold along his palm. When he looked down, a faint new mark lay there, pale and precise, as if time itself had signed for delivery. Delicious, Dubois murmured. A taste, then. And with the finality of a sharp blade, the music cut. Silence flooded the room. Outside, Royal Street looked the way it always pretended to look. Charming, damp, and different. The house behind them sat quiet and respectable, as though it had hosted nothing stranger than a garden party. That was New Orleans. It would swallow a nightmare, wipe its mouth, and ask if you'd like a beignet. Lucien stepped onto the sidewalk and exhaled slowly. He adjusted a cuff that did not need adjusting. Tiny acts of order, or how people stitch themselves closed after something has tried to pull them apart. Evelyn walked beside him without hurry. Her presence did not make the street safer, exactly, but it did make it steadier. "You paid," she said. "I negotiated," Lucien replied. In his coat pocket, his fingers closed around something small and unfamiliar. A black coin from the Masquerade, thin as a communion wafer and stamped with a laughing mask. It was warmer than it should have been. Evelyn noticed. Of course she noticed. "He'll want more later," she said. Lucien's mouth curved faintly. "Everyone wants more later. That's what makes them dangerous." They walked on, away from the watching house, away from the room where music signed contracts, away from the kind of light that makes promises look decorative. In New Orleans, midnight doesn't end. It just changes costume. You've been listening to Tongue of the Serpent. Tonight, the world widened. What began in the quiet, dangerous intimacy of the crew has opened into something larger now. Older powers, older debts, and the kind of bargains that do not end where the music does. Lucien walked into a masquerade, but what waited for him there was not spectacle alone. It was memory. It was leverage. It was a reminder that some invitations are really summons, and some games begin long before anyone admits the rules. And this is only episode 2. There are still more doors to open, more histories buried under silk and ritual and old New Orleans charm. More things moving behind the beauty of the city, waiting for the right hour, the right wound, the right name spoken aloud. Thank you for listening. Until next time, be careful what recognizes you before you recognize it.